My Last Lie. Posted by Original Fibber. As a child, I lied a lot. I don't know why, maybe just to appear more interesting. I guess I have always felt that life is pretty mundane, and my life in particular was nothing special or noteworthy. I've always been drawn to the fantastical, the macabre, the otherworldly. I used to sit up late in the darkness and watch Tales from the Crypt, The Twilight Zone, and Are You Afraid of the Dark? My interest in horror meant my lies always had a sinister tint. For example, I lied that I could read tarot cards. I used to draw nonsense glyphs on my arms and would act super mysterious if anyone asked what the characters meant. I told other children that I had seen a snake in the long grass near the running track at the back of our school. Looking back now, it was pretty messed up. Then something happened that meant I never told another lie again. This is the story of my last lie. I was in grade 4 and our year level had our first camp. My classmates and I were dropped off early to school by our parents, eager and ready for an adventure. After a bus trip that seemed to take forever, we finally arrived at camp. It was way out in the bush and consisted of maybe a dozen cabins scattered in a rough, horseshoe shape. The wood cabins were dwarfed by the towering gum trees that surrounded the area. It was hot, but the trees provided welcome shade from the mid-morning sun. Induction included the usual conventions: meeting the camp staff, teachers explaining the rules, pointing out the toilet block, and walking down from the cabin area to the dining hall, which was closer to the entryway of the complex. We were also shown our cabins. Each cabin was a simple rectangle with a small porch out the front. Inside was one open room with 6 beds and some junky, old furniture. I was assigned Gold Cabin with 4 of my friends: Emily, Andrea, Lauren, and Tanya. We unpacked and rolled out our sleeping bags and carried on like 9-year-olds do. Then in the afternoon, we were rounded up and did craft activities, bushwalking, and played kick the can. At dusk, we were called to dinner in the big dining hall and afterwards made our way back to the cabins to sit around a big fire. I remember how creepy that walk back from the dining hall was. It was an overcast night, and even though the adults had torches, the surrounding bush was pitch black. My friends were talking and being terribly casual, so clearly it didn't bother them, but I remember how uneasy I felt being so far away from everything, surrounded by nothing but wilderness. Tanya must have noticed my worried face because she asked me if I was okay. I lied and said I was. Once we reached the glow of the massive fire, I felt better though and listened intently as the camp leaders told stories from the dream time. Soon, it was time for bed and the girls were saying how cool it was that we didn't grow up in Gold Cabin. We made a plan to stay up after we were given the lights out order, talk and eat the chips Lauren had smuggled out at dinner. Sure enough, after the teacher checked in on us and wished us a good night, we all yawned very convincingly. On came the torches, and out came the decadent Smith's chips. I stayed up for a long time, but then I must have dozed off. Now let me explain. I always felt very out of place around my friends. They all seemed prettier, smarter, sportier, and cooler than me. I was a bit of a forgotten child at home and didn't get a lot of care. So where my friends were outgoing, bubbly, and confident, I was a bit awkward, withdrawn, and self-conscious. I only explain because maybe where other kids would laugh off what happened next, I was utterly humiliated and distraught because I was a bit down on myself to begin with. It was morning and I could hear the other campers heading to the toilet block. The Gold Cabin girls got their toothbrushes and towels, and we started heading to the showers. As we walked, when other kids saw me, they started laughing. I had no idea why and just sort of sheepishly smiled back. I remember Emily and Andrea stifling laughter behind their hands. I was really confused until we entered the toilet block and I saw my face in the mirror above the sinks. I had black markers all over it. Sharp dashes and lines crisscrossed my face. Emily and Andrea were dying to explain what happened and blurted out that when I fell asleep, they put textures in my hands and tickled my face. When I brought my hands up to sweat away the tickle, I would end up drawing on myself. They apologized through their laughter and said it was just too funny and too easy and I shouldn't have fallen asleep first. I could feel my whole head go hot and tears burned behind my eyes. I turned around and screamed at them how stupid their joke was because I was allergic to some ink. I wasn't, and they could have killed me. They couldn't have. I ran into a toilet cubicle and sat down on the seat and cried. Tanya and Lauren asked if I was okay, and I asked them to leave me alone. Looking back on it now, it was a pretty good prank. That wasn't what upset me. It was that my suspicions were true. I was the odd one out. They all plotted against me and laughed at me because I was different to them. No one would have pulled a prank on Emily. I sat there till I could hear the toilet block was empty and then had a shower. As I furiously scrubbed my face with hot water and a bar of soap, a teacher came in and told me to hurry up. I got the text off, but my face was red raw from the scrubbing. That day, we had to go visit a sawmill and I was miserable. I didn't talk to my friends and I kept a low profile. I just wanted to go home. That night at dinner, the girls all apologized and it seemed a bit more sincere after my day-long sulk session. I accepted their apology and we made up as it was the last night of camp and we should be having fun instead of being angry at each other. Why anyone was angry at me, I couldn't work out. Then I told them that I just went to sleep early last night because I knew about the legend. They prodded me about the legend and I reluctantly told them that my brother had attended this camp a couple of years ago. True, and there was a story about Gold Cabin, lie. It said that our camp used to be a settlement area for the men that worked at the sawmill in the 1930s. There was a woman, Old Meg, who lived on the spot where Gold Cabin now stood with her 5 boys. The boys started working at the sawmill young, and Meg would do odd jobs around the settlement to make money while her boys were at the mill. Anyway, Old Meg was cursed. Her husband had died years ago from illness, but then her boys started dropping dead. In the space of a year, all 5 sons met violent, horrible deaths, not one of them reaching 16. A couple died in accidents at the mill where they fell into machinery and got sliced/crunched up. Another one got kicked in the head by a horse. One got stabbed in the neck one night after work by a vagrant, and the youngest, her favorite, died in his bed. Old Meg, now mad from the sorrow of losing all she loved, smothered the youngest son one night because she knew something awful would come of him, and in her madness, thought going by her hand, peaceful in the night, was a better fate. My friends listened intently to every word of my tale when I dropped the ending on them. And the legend is that now Gold Cabin is haunted by the ghost of Old Meg stuck in a loop, replaying that tragic night with her youngest boy. While campers should be sleeping, she creeps into the room and hovers over the bed of some poor kid. If you keep your eyes closed and don't make a sound, she will think you are dead and move on. But if you are awake, if you open your eyes, or if you make a single peep, she will lunge down at you. You will look into her horrid, twisted face and see all her sorrow and all her anger, and you will be driven mad or die of fright. I told them that a few kids over the years had been found dead in Gold Cabin, and it was chalked up to heart attacks or aneurysms so the place could stay open, but the legend told the true story of how they died. It was time to walk back from the dining hall like we had done the previous night, and I could tell the girls were nervous. I loved it. Tanya suddenly grabbed my arm and pointed into the trees. "What was that?" she asked. "What was what?" I replied. She said she saw something move out in the trees. I knew that she was on edge from my story and that the dark was messing with her, like it did to me the prior evening. So I said in my coolest voice, "PSSH nothing, you're just scared." She nervously smiled back at me. That night in the cabins, everyone got straight into bed. The girls talked a little bit just to pretend they weren't frightened by my story, but I could tell they were. And soon we all fell asleep. I woke up in the middle of the night needing to pee. I looked down around me and the moonlight filtering through the flimsy curtains showed the room pretty clearly. All the girls were asleep. Here, I had a brilliant idea. I would go to the toilet and then creep back wearing my black hoodie. I'd sidle up to Emily's bed and stand over her. Maybe prod her a bit to wake her up and then scare the ever-loving shit out of her. It would be great if the other girls saw me and thought I was old Meg too. Oh man, this was going to be great revenge, and then the next day I could laugh and say it was just too funny and too easy and they shouldn't have fallen asleep first. I carefully slid out of bed, found my hoodie, a torch, and made my way out of the cabin. I was so happy that I was quiet enough to not wake the girls. I ran to the toilet block because, honestly, it was a bit scary out there in the night all by myself. After I relieved myself and practiced my scariest face in the mirror, I exited the toilets and started back towards the cabin. I kept the torch off in case it shone through any windows, potentially waking someone. After my eyes adjusted, it really wasn't so bad out in the night, under the gums all alone. I could see pretty well because of the full moon and without the torch on had much better peripheral vision. Thinking this, as I walked I looked up at Gold Cabin and saw the door close. Shit, someone was awake. Or maybe a teacher was checking in. I didn't see anyone else in the toilets or walking around outside. Whoever it was must have been entering the cabin and I just missed them. Or maybe I left the door ajar and one of the girls had woken, seen it open and closed it. I stood frozen for a moment thinking of my next move. I decided that through the crappy curtains I should be able to see into the room and work out who was awake from outside the cabin. If everything looked settled again, and it was just one of my friends closing the door, I could wait 10 minutes for them to fall asleep again and go through with my plan. I'd come this far, hadn't I? The window on the far side of the cabin had a big metal box just to the left of it. I think it must have been covering plumbing pipes or power cables or something. I could jump up on that because without the porch that ran along the face of the cabin, I wouldn't be able to reach the window. It also meant if it was a teacher, I wouldn't get caught as they came back out the front door. I crept across the field and ducked around the outside of the wooden building. I was now around the back of our little house and behind me was a bush. I shimmied up the side of the metal box as quietly as possible, stood on my tiptoes and leaned carefully to my right, hugging the wall to line my face up to the window. There was a small gap between the curtains and the sill, so I had a clear view into the room. Although the limited light meant I had to wait a moment for my eyes to adjust and my brain to piece together the shapes of the interior. I could see our beds, bags, and the lumpy outlines of my friends under their covers. I also saw a black shape by Emily's bed that I couldn't recognize. I squinted my eyes, trying to make it out. In the space of seconds, this is what flew through my mind. It was definitely a person and was far too tall to be one of my friends. It was wearing black and had a long, dark ponytail down its back. It was turned away from me so I couldn't see its face, but I knew it wasn't any of my teachers or any of the camp leaders I had met. I was certain I did not know this person. This person who was just standing there, over Emily's bed looking down at her. Terror jolted through my body, and in that instant I knew. It was old Meg. As a lover of all things horror, I had been scared before. A couple of movies even made me cry and close my eyes. I was so scared, but nothing had ever, nor would ever feel the same as the undiluted fear that gripped me in that moment. Something was in that room where it shouldn't be. My mouth hung open, but I couldn't scream. Short, ragged breaths shot in and out of my lungs, and my heart beat so fast that my chest hammered the wooden wall pressed against it. Every single hair on my body was standing on end, and somehow I was unbearably hot and cold all at once. And I couldn't move. I couldn't force my wide eyes away from that form. I watched as it bent down and covered Emily. I could see her legs thrash wildly, and the dark figure's arm sort of jerked close to her for a moment. If I hadn't already emptied my bladder, I would have wet myself at that moment. Another second of struggling, and Emily's legs stopped moving. Old Meg straightened and began to turn towards one of the other beds, one in my direction. My stomach dropped so hard and fast it felt like the moment you fell on a roller coaster. I'm sure the force of it was what pulled me down out of view. I sat on the metal box for a moment. Where I couldn't move before, now all I wanted to do was run. I jumped off the metal box and landed in the dirt. I scanned the trees ahead. Did I bolt into their cover? What if Meg saw me escaping? I looked down and noticed there was a small gap between the bottom of the cabin and the ground. I could squeeze into the space and hide. I hit the deck and wiggled under. There were stones and sharp sticks that rubbed against my belly, arms and legs, but I barely noticed them. I crawled as silently and as quickly as possible until I was in as far as I could go. I was facing the way of the porch. As the adrenaline screaming through my body eased off under the safety of cover, I felt more present. No way it was old Meg. I made it up. Elite. It wasn't possible. The thump of my heartbeat in my ears lessened, and I could hear the floor creaking above me. I looked up and could see the wooden boards and thought this is all that is separating me from it. What was happening in that room? What was happening to my friends? I closed my eyes and put my hands over my ears and cried silently into the dirt. Why did I lie? Why hadn't I run for help? I could still go get help. I could outrun it. I could scream, but I didn't. I was a coward, a lying coward. I don't know how long I lay there with that voice repeating over and over in my head, lying coward. It was like that was all there was in the world and it would never stop. Those two words were an all-consuming truth and my only reality. Ahead I heard movement and the sound of hinges squeaking as the front door opened. Holy shit. My eyes pierced ahead of me, waiting to see a face drop down at any moment. A horrible, twisted face. The face of death. The last face I would ever see. Instead, I saw 2 feet in men's work boots. I watched as they cautiously moved around the perimeter of the cabin. I twisted my head around following them until I couldn't see them anymore. I was expecting cold hands to wrap around my ankles at any time and I'd be done. But nothing happened. It was gone. I don't remember what happened after that. I probably fainted or just checked out for a while. Then I heard a woman screaming. More cries and wailing. Sunlight beaming through the gap ahead of me. I could see feet shuffling near the porch. Could hear the floorboards above being pounded by frantic feet. People calling my name. Sirens. Eventually someone looked under the cabin and saw me there like a trapped animal and pulled me out. Everything following was a haze. I was taken to hospital. I was questioned many times. I stayed home from school for a couple of weeks. My siblings treated me like I was a china plate that would break at any moment, and my mother frowned a permanent line in her forehead from all the worried looks she gave me. We learned from the investigation that followed that my 4 friends Emily, Andrea, Lauren, and Tanya were murdered that night in the cabin. Security cameras near the dining hall revealed that a man had entered the camp and loitered for a while in the trees. Watching, waiting. He wore all black, had a black stocking over his head and wore work boots. He entered Gold Cabin and strangled each girl, one at a time in their beds before leaving through the bush, where he ran on foot for some time before driving off in an old Uda. I think about my poor friends lying there with that man hurting them. People asked why none of them screamed or struggled too much. But I know why. It was because of that stupid story I told them. They kept their eyes closed tight while he wrapped his big hands around their necks and stole their last breaths. I imagine their fear in those moments, and it physically hurts. What if any one of them had screamed? I never told the police the story of old Meg. They knew I went to the toilet before it happened. They knew I saw something terrifying and hid, and that's why I survived. As the case grew cold, they asked many times if I saw him and could explain what he looked like. If I had seen him, my description could help them catch him, and he would be punished for what he did. This is the last lie I ever told, but it is the same one I tell myself every day. I tell myself that on that night, the moment I ducked away from the window, I didn't see him as he turned towards me. That I moved away too fast. I tell myself that my eyes didn't look straight into his. That I didn't see his lip curl into a smile and watch as he lifted an index finger up to his mouth, pressing it there, warning me to stay silent. But a horrible truth burns deep down inside me, and it is one that I can never forget. I know it every time I close my eyes to sleep. The truth is, it's not the made-up face of a ghostly old woman I see every night in my dreams. Old Meg does not haunt me, but he does. A stocking pulled back over his head as he gestures directly to me, hush.
Elite.
I can still help them, but I'm a lying coward. I saw his face. Archived post. New comments cannot be posted and votes cannot be cast.